Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to do a quick travelogue of all the kinds of things you can do in New York this holiday season, and some of them are really cute. But one of them, as you see, you can actually get a subway car ornament. Take the A train, and if you go to the New York City Transit Museum, which is a site in itself. If you want to learn about the transit history of New York from the very beginning, you go there in Brooklyn. It's actually was a real station that they closed, and they film any movie that involves a subway train in New York City. They film at that station, so you've all seen it. And so that's one of the things you can do. So let's go on. Right? So this shows there's shopping, sightseeing, entertainment, all sorts of things. And I grew up there, so I had a lot of chance to see all this stuff. And I go back from time to time. Still have actually some friends there. And maybe you didn't know, but New York's patron saint is Saint Nicholas, on which Santa Claus is based. And there's a wonderful legend about him. He was very charitable, and one of his charities were young women who could not marry because they had no dowries. And the story is that he would toss bags of gold in through the window of their homes, and this way they had a dowry and they could make a more advantageous marriage. And this is a more modern version, and actually what we consider our modern Santa Claus in the red suit and beard and everything was really largely developed by a Civil War era illustrator called Thomas Nast. Okay, and the library has this. If you ever wanted to find out more about Santa Claus, and of course, you see that's a scene from Miracle on 34th Street with Natalie Wood and Edmund Gwenn. And actually, one of the we're planning to do for next December is some of the backstories involving some of these classic films. And I'm doing one for every decade. So right now I'm covering 1939 to 49, and you'll see some very familiar things like this picture, but you'll also see a few that you've probably never heard of, and yet were still interesting films. So hopefully you all can make it then. Now, you really sort of have to get around, and it's a very complex system because there are three major lines, and they were actually two of them were privately built and run. So it's not the best integrated public transit system around. I mean, like Washington's Metra, the MARTA, and Atlanta, but they're also much smaller. New York has over 400 stations. So, and it's the most heavily used transit system, at least in America, if not the world. And this is just one stop on East 53rd Street and Lexington Avenue. And you'll see all these things, the N train there, the D train, the W train, all these trains go there. And one of the reasons why you should learn how to use it is because cabs are expensive. According to what I just read, the average fare in Manhattan of a cab ride is $19.21. And that sort of mounts up. You also get stuck in traffic. And so the meter is still going. And it's really better if you learn the subway system. And you can actually go online and go to, it's called mta.info, and they have maps and they show the stations. One of the other ways you can do it is to go pick some place you'd like to go to, and they on their websites will show you all the transit options, and that's always a good thing to do. So, and you can actually look up stuff on your phone while you're doing real time, which is so cool, because I spent a lot of my time in New York growing up and living there, giving directions to hopeless tourists trying to figure out where the hell they were. and this is something new. Um, I believe you can still get what they call a Metro card. It's a little card like this that you actually put money on, and they can do it at the attendance booth, but you also could do it online, and you used to swipe it to get through the turnstile to get to the platforms. Well, now it's been replaced by Omni. You can actually set up an app on your phone and put money in it from your bank account or credit card, and it just you just hold it over the viewer and just whisk you right through. And there's a lot of things you can do. Um, like there's plenty of places to see the views on really nice winter's day. In fact, if you go to the Brooklyn and Queens waterfronts, all the old factories and piers are all gone, and they've been replaced by parks and walkways. You could literally walk miles and see some great stuff. You can see buying a Christmas trees, New York style. This is how most people in New York get their trees. They dealers put them on racks on front of storefronts, uh, and actually, you actually do. I just found that out today that you actually do need a license from Consumer Affairs because somebody in Brooklyn Heights. He was selling hot trees on Montague Street, and he just got busted because he was using the license number of the store that he had his trees in front of. He didn't have one of his own, but you do need permission from the store because you can see how limited it is. And most New Yorkers actually buy the tree and they lug it home and directly to their apartment because they're all over the place. You generally seldom have to go more than 2 or 3 blocks to get it, and so that's how most people get their trees. I mean, some people probably go up to Sullivan or Putnam counties, chop down a tree, but yeah, this is the easiest way to do it. And you can go to a lot of places to watch the sledding if it's snowing. I have to really do a proviso on that because sometimes it can really snow where you can do that. Sometimes you really can. But if it happens to be snowing when you're there, and people, I mean, they they got two skis. Everybody does everything, and most of the parks will have on their website what are the best sledding spots. They'll also tell you. You can actually say best sledding spots in New York, and all these people who go online will go on and tell you all this stuff. And this happens to be Cedar Hill by the Metropolitan Museum. And actually, it had a less romantic name. It used to be called Dog Hill because of what you did with your dogs. But and it also has a secret because many, many feet underneath this hill is the water tunnel number 3, which is under construction to provide more water to Brooklyn and Queens. And I know it's there because I actually had to go down it once. I used to work for an actuarial company, and we handled drug claims for unions. And my union was the Sandhogs, Local 147. And in order to get a signature, and it was a must have, and they sent me because I was the youngest person in the office at the time, I actually wound up having to put on waders and a hard hat and go down many feet, like 40, 50 feet, something down there. And I'm tracking through the mud and all. We got the signature. It was scary, but it was sort of fun. And these are some other things you can do in the Central Park. You can whether they will still be around long term, the carriage rides, I don't really know, but usually they're in front of the Plaza Hotel at 59th Street, and they have like regular taxis that have to post their fares for how much rides and everything. And it's also nice to walk in the park during the day or early evening. and you see some of the beautiful skylights and everything. But uh, it's really quite an experience. And there's a lot of people in. I mean, I know you probably heard rumors don't go into a New York City park at night, but there's quite a few people there, and there's safety in numbers. And this is something you could do at the Woolman skating rink. They have an event. It's usually held just around December 12th or something. It's called Hanukkah on Ice. And if you're Jewish and or just want to go and see, because people actually do wear costumes like the skating dreidel here, and they've been doing it's a new holiday tradition. They've been doing it for about 15 years now, and I mean, next time I go back there, if I'm back there, Chris, I got to go and see this. And of course, the Empire State Building and the newer Freedom Tower downtown, both of them have spectacular views. But if you happen to want to see the department store windows, Fifth Avenue, and everything, that's probably your better location because you're within walking distance of some of the other stuff I'll show you. And one thing I do have to warn you about, it is 1,250 feet high. And when you're on the observation platform in the wintertime, if it's like 37 degrees on a sidewalk, it's going to be a good 20 or more degrees cooler at that height. So dress appropriately. And here's some typical windows on Fifth Avenue. And I mean, it's getting to be sort of an endangered species because with more and more online shopping, Lord and Taylor just closed. They used to have nice windows. Uh, Best and Company, Arnold Cosmo, Altman's, all these stores I knew was good. They're all gone. Best and Company is where Trump Tower is actually now. He actually bought that building, tore it down, built his. So, but they're still there. And there's a really good story about Saks on the left because they usually have to use the outside of the building because their windows were very narrow. This was before a lot of stores started doing this when they were built in the early 1920s. So they have to be very creative. And of course, Cartier's, they always tried to make it look like a gift, like, hint, hint, jewelry. And of course, you can always go to Macy's. You can visit Santa Claus, and of course, there's Santa all over the place. And you could also mail a letter. And what they do is that they donate for every letter you drop off. They provide a certain amount of money for charities, and so it's really for a good cause. And they've been doing this for a long time. They actually introduced Christmas displays. This is from the early 1900s, and this is from much later. And they also pioneered being open at night on Christmas Eve, which no stores did in the 19th century. Their store used to be on 14th Street, 6th Avenue, and they were right there by the 6th Avenue elevated train, so it seemed like a slam dunk to just, stay open for people when they got out of work to do some last minute Christmas shopping. And of course, if you're in Midtown, you have to see the Rockefeller Center tree. I don't recommend going to see the tree when it's first lit. It gets really, really crowded, and it's sort of a mob scene. But anytime after that, it's a real pleasure, and it's a beautiful tree. They're usually about 80 or so feet high, and they're usually donated by some growers. They actually, let the tree grow as high as it'll go, and they reserve it just for that. And it's a must if you go to New York at Christmas. And this is where it started. This is actually them building Rockefeller Center. And this is actually workers getting their pay envelopes in front of the tree. This was an ad hoc thing that they just decided they got a tree and they put stuff on it. And as the complex got built and the people ran it, managed it, they said, this is sort of a good thing. It got in old papers and everything and good publicity. So they just took the idea and ran with it, and they've been doing it ever since. And of course, in the neighborhood, in the complex is Radio City, and you could actually see the Christmas show with the Rockettes. And of course, you've seen them there in every single Macy's parade every year. And one of the stores is the FAO Schwartz store. Now, it's not as big as the one, if you saw the Tom Hanks movie called Big, where he is a little boy who wishes he were grown up and he's doing that dance. That store was at the 59th Street and Fifth Avenue and was originally built by General Motors. So it had these huge spaces. So it was like humongous toy shop. And they had all these trains and stuff going. And but what they still have, it's still worth going to see. Okay, and while you're there, it doesn't hurt for adults to have a little libation. And Bar 65 is the former Rainbow Grill, and it was directly across from the Rainbow Room, which was extremely pricey. Big, big bucks to eat there. But the cheaper alternative is that you got the same view for like a fraction of the price because they were across from each other. You got off the elevator and you went one direction for one direction for the other. And so as you could see a little bit of the view there, so it's definitely worth a stop there. Now, a few blocks away is the Winter Village in Bryant Park, which is right behind the New York Public Library. And they have all sorts of booths and everything. This is also in New York where they have Fashion Week. And normally it's a park with grass and and benches and everything. People can relax in Midtown, and so they even have an ice skating rink, which is a lot of fun. And while you're there, you could also check out the Library Lions, and they're decorated for the season. Um, their names are Patience and Fortitude, and they were named by Mayor LaGuardia in the 1930s because he felt that these were attributes that New Yorkers in the Depression era should have. And they've been called that ever since. And for a while, these wreaths had to be removed because what happened was is that the chemicals used to preserve the wreaths were wearing the sandstone on the lions, on the statues. And of course, that couldn't do. So they had to remove them for a while, and they worked out a better, more ecologically sane alternative, and they've been restored. And the library itself, they usually have some sort of special display in their exhibition rooms, sort of like, Christmas book treasures or something. And actually, all the libraries, like the Brooklyn Public Library main branch, will have something. And that's also just a hop, skip, and a jump away from the Brooklyn Museum. So that's worth visiting. And that's why you need the Omni app, the MTA app, to find out how to get to everything. And a little further up in East 70s and Fifth Avenue in Central Park is the Metropolitan Museum, and it's not the cheapest thing to get into, but they have you know uh, all sorts of things, everything you can imagine: Western art, Asian art, Egyptian art. But this is a really special thing because this is like a 250-year-old from Naples. It was actually made for royalty of the Nativity, and the picture doesn't really do it justice. You really have to actually go and see it. It is enormous, and it's something of a ritual because a lot of parents bring their city kids to go and see this, and it's often the first art museum in New York City gets to go visit. And when you purchase a ticket to see the main building, you can also include the cloisters, which is a little further up, but it's not hard to get to. And these are medieval buildings. I mean, this could not happen today, but back in the teens and the 20s, around the World War One era, John D. Rockefeller actually went to Europe and he found these ruined abbeys, ruined nunneries, ruined churches, and just bought them wholesale. They were torn down and brought over here and reconstructed, and they were all joined together. So you have like a Romanesque and you have like a Gothic and everything. And that's where the bulk of the museum's medieval art is. And of course, one of the things you can do, and you don't have to go to New York to do this, is read some classic Christmas literature. And these were all written in New York or by New Yorkers. And here's a visit from old St. Nick, Clement Clark Moore, who was actually in the New York Theological Institute. He was actually a scholar. And he seems like a very unlikely person to have written this. And actually, a prominent New York family, the Livingstons, said that they attributed the story to have been written by one of their ancestors named Henry Livingston. And, but I mean, Clark actually admitted authorship a year or so later after he wrote it in 1823. And he had a written manuscript, and the Livingstons produced nothing. However, a little in this century, they actually did a concordance of Henry Livingston's writings and Moore's writings, and they said in style, the style tended to favor Livingston rather than Moore. But I mean, as far as the Livingstons are concerned, it's just a family legend. And I mean, families can get the bit in their teeth when it comes to legends. Remember my Aunt Charlotte telling me that one of my ancestors was a pirate. So, and you can see some things. They actually have a park for Clement Moore. I mean, this is all his land. He actually inherited this land, and he decided to redevelop it. And he even named it. He named it Chelsea, and it's was named for a naval hospital in London. And I mean, he made quite a lot of money out of these building lots and didn't actually have to work for the theological seminary, but he did. And right there on Seventh Avenue, you could see on a modern building a plaque saying that there he was, and that's where he lived when he wrote it and everything. And people actually do go to the park because I knew someone who actually saw that. He said that people just go and just do this ad hoc. They read the poem and have hot chocolate and stuff. And of course, there's the editorial because Virginia said that her little friends told her there was no Santa Claus. So she asked her father, said, well, if you see it in the paper, then it must be true. So she wrote to the New York Sun. And I mean, every so often you hear it on TV or on the radio, somebody will read it. It's not terribly long, but it's really, really very, very good. And she was quite a figure in New York for a long time. She died around in the early 60s, maybe 1960, but she was very well known in the New York City library community. And for decades, she would actually go and visit branches and actually read the editorial to the children. And The Gift of the Magi, written by O. Henry. And You know the story. She cut off her hair to buy him a watch fob, and he pawned the watch to get her a brush set for her long hair. And actually, while you're there, you go to 18th Street in Irving Place, you can see Peach Tavern, which is like one of my favorite New York restaurants. And there's not too many restaurants I used to go to that are still around, but this is one of them. And you can even sit in this booth where he may have written it. It's a real, the jury's still out on that. I mean, the restaurant likes to say that's where he wrote it, but there's no real documentation or anything. And but he was a regular, and he at least could have sort of sketched out the basic idea of the story. I'll go as far as that. But it's got a great menu. It's not a tourist trap. It's still sort of a neighborhood place in this neighborhood called Gramercy. And one of the things I liked about him, he was a Midwesterner who was absolutely enchanted by New York. And he made a famous quote. He described New York as Baghdad on the subway. And the greatest gift, that's what came out of it. That was the original story for It's a Wonderful Life. And um, the author, Philip Van Doren Stern, he tried to get it written up in magazines like Vanity Fair, Esquire. He hit all the New Yorker, he hit all the magazines, and he got turned down flat. Nobody wanted to buy it. So he actually had his own vanity copies printed, handed it out as Christmas gifts. And I actually have a copy at home, and it's the basic story. Uh, some differences. For instance, George Bailey has gotten his wish from Clarence. He is not. He has not been born, and he goes to visit the people in his life who no longer know him, and he poses himself as a Fuller Brush salesman, and that's how he gets into the house to talk to these people. And one of the biggest thing is, if you remember the movie, there's this big drama scene where he goes chasing Mary, and she's the spinster librarian who never married, and she screams, and everybody starts shooting at him and everything. Uh, that didn't happen in the book. Mary was, in fact, very much married, but it was unhappily because George wasn't there to marry. It's still a good book, though. And these are, we do have this book and this DVD for the movie, and it's in Norma Rockwell's Christmas book. You can always just ask them to see if they can find it for you, and they will. Now, this is one of the things, this is very random. You never know where you're going to see it, but New Yorkers can be very creative in ad hoc, off the cuff Christmas decorations. And this is, you never know when you're going to run into one of these, and it's a lot of fun to discover them. And some people bring their tree home on the subway. And this funny thing, this Life magazine shows a bunch of sidewalk Santas hired for the season who are either going to work or coming back. One of them's yawning, so I'm tending to think they were coming back and they were all waiting for their train. And it's really funny because I have to tell you, for a New York City kid, it's very, very hard to believe in Santa Claus for long because you you see them all over the place in poses like this. And in my childhood experience, it was probably better to see them hanging out at the bus station or subway instead of at the off-track betting shop. And of course, you should always plan to see a Broadway show. Uh, and I mean, this is a good family choice, Frozen. That's running right now. And they have some really good sites to find all the shows. This is current. This is Broadway.com. Another one is called Playbill.com. and they tell you all the shows, and they lead. You can actually buy tickets through them and get descriptions, so you sort of know. But you should also open yourself up to seeing off Broadway and off Broadway things, because there's some really worthwhile theater, and their ticket prices are a fraction of what Broadway charges. Because nowadays Broadway does these big, high budget, flashy musicals, and that didn't used to be. They used to do much more intimate, smaller, easier to do mound shows, and the ticket prices. I mean, when I first started going in the '60s, I was still a teenager. I could afford it with my allowance. I mean, I'd have to save up for a couple of weeks, but I could do it, and I could get good seats. You usually first balcony, which is, if you're going to be in the balcony, that's where you want to be. Now, this is something rather unusual, and if you have kids and you should definitely do this. Um, at the New York Museum, I mean, you can actually see these cars in the museum, but they are machines. They do actually have to move from various times, and this is a good opportunity for them to do it. And these are the original R1s for the IND Independent Line in 1932, and the average New York City subway car has a 35-year life. So I used to travel on these trains, and they have the original open fans. So be careful how you play around with your hands. And they have these lacquered basket seats that are a perfect B if they happen to come loose and you sit on them. I mean, literally, you could draw blood. But and then you can actually shop, because they take you out. They not only go all up and down Manhattan, but they actually, some of them go out the Queens Plaza, which has a huge mall there. So you can, if you want to Christmas shop, you can do that. One of my favorite places, the Christmas shop, is now gone. It was the Chelsea Flea Market every Saturday and Sunday. It was in a parking lot. No, it's gone. Sorry. And now, this isn't the only one man Christmas carol in town, but this, I think, is rather unique, because it's in the old Merchants Museum, and it's the only house left on this rather gritty industrial block with garages and lofts, factories, and but it was once a very fashionable location, and it was built by the Treadwell family, and they lived there for 100 years. And so it is a perfect time capsule of the Empire, Victorian, Edwardian furniture and knickknacks. And so they actually have a one-man show, perform all the parts, and Scrooge and everybody. So if you want to do something a little unusual when you're there, that's a good thing to do. And while you're gadding about, there's plenty of places to eat. I mean, there's restaurants all over the place, but it's also a lot of fun to eat on the hoof, as many New Yorkers do. And you could either do old school, get a soubrette hot dog and sauerkraut and mustard, or you could go to some of the newer food trucks, and they have cuisine from all around the world. I mean, from the very first, New York has been sort of an international city. When the city was under the control of the Dutch in the 17th century, they had to report to the Dutch Parliament exactly what was going on. And one of the things their directors said, that 18 languages could be heard spoken on the streets. And this is when New York was about the size of a rather average gated community here. And, one of the places you should also think about is going downtown. And this is how the New York Stock Exchange, they decorate the columns. You can actually, during the day, see the exchange. They have their Christmas tree. And you're very close to Bowling Green Park, which is the oldest in the city. It is so old that if you go there, you'll see a cast iron fence with spikes, but they're all curiously blunted as though something was removed, and it was. They originally had little crowns because they were made to represent King George III. And when we declared our independence, they sawed off all the crowns. They also took down the statue of the king, which was the only equestrian statue in all of North America, melted it down for bullets. New York Historical Society does have pieces, though, so if you ever wanted to see them, that's where they are. And nearby, you can go to the South Street Seaport, and they have some really interesting. They have a museum there. They have reconstructed ships there, and they have a lot of nice shops. And these buildings are really old. They were all built around 1800, and when New York surpassed Philadelphia as the major city and port in the United States. And nearby is Stone Street, so named because uh, uh, back in the 1650s, a woman lived there who had a business of laundry, and she'd hang her wash out, and a nearby brewery wagons would go back and forth, and they were getting dust all over her product. So she made her husband go to the Common Council and request them to pave it, and they did. It is one of the oldest paved streets in America, and it's now a pedestrian walkway. There's no traffic there anymore, and they have a lot of nice shops. They have a lot of nice restaurants, and these buildings themselves were built to replace those lost in the Great Fire of 1836. Uh, and it was so bad the 693 buildings burned, and the smoke was seen 97 miles away in Philadelphia. And this is definitely worth going up the train to see. They always have the New York Botanical Gardens and the Bronx have these great displays. This is the old Yankee Stadium with a train going by. They really put on a spectacular show. Now, one of the things you can do, you can actually get tickets for a sing-along Messiah at Lincoln Center and go see the New York City Ballet perform the Nutcracker. And actually, I've seen both, and you'd be surprised how good the average person sounds in a chorus. It actually is a lot of fun. They give you the music, and they have principal singers for the solos, but you are the chorus. And there's all plenty of places of worship that celebrate the season. So there's plenty of places to go to. And this is one of the things they always have a display. They have what they call the Great Borough Bake Off, and all five boroughs have bakers, and they all compete against each other to see who can make the most spectacular cake. And people actually get to vote on them and everything. And this is one of the displays. This is the Chrysler Building, and so that's always a lot of fun to see. And basically, that's another thing you can do. You could walk across the Brooklyn Bridge. It's not very far. It's a little over a mile, and it's um, uh, Edward McCullough, who wrote a book about the building of the bridge called The Great Bridge, said when that it was like standing on the rim of the Grand Canyon, and it is really one of the most spectacular places to see the view. So it gets very crowded. A lot of people walk across it and they bike across it. So just watch yourself. But it's a great view. And actually, the nearby Manhattan Bridge also provides a really great view, and it's a lot less crowded. But uh, I hope you enjoyed this little travelogue of things you can see and do in New York. And I do have a list of various different places you could check out if you happen to go, and I'll send them to Deb, and she could just send it to anyone. So if you go to the Leesburg Library information line and email, and it'll and answer your question saying you'd like that list, it'll go to Deb, and she'll send it to you.